Thank you, Carl-Johan, for facilitating this conversation. And thanks to our Youth Summit winners for sharing their vision for the future on stage. Let's give them another round of applause. We are now diving into the headline session of our event here in Stockholm, our discussion with the chair of NATO's military committee, Admiral Rob Bauer. I will now give the floor to Federica Mangiameli to moderate this conversation touching on defense, deterrence, and resilience.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Good morning, everyone.
Hello.
Good morning, Admiral Bauer.
Hello.
So, before we start, a couple of housekeeping rules. We want to make this session as interactive as possible, so I highly encourage the audience in the room and people watching us online to prepare your questions, because you will have the chance to ask your questions directly to Admiral Bauer. Now, with no further ado, I would like to start this conversation. Our chat today will unfold around 3 different pillars: resilience, defense, and deterrence. And I'd like to start with resilience. We've seen the opening remarks of the Director General of FSB. She was mentioning some great work that Sweden is doing in trying to build in societal resilience. And this led me to an anecdote, because at the beginning of the year, your remark, "Europe must be ready for war," caused quite a reaction. There were young people that took over social media, and they were expressing their fear and confusion, underlying how we are not ready for a war scenario. Now, I understand that not all the countries of the alliance are like Sweden, but you are the NATO Youth Summit. You have the chance to address young people from across the alliance. Have you got a special message? And I'd like to ask you, what can we do in our daily life to build societal resilience?
First of all, good morning to all of you. My remarks in January were not to scare people, but to prepare people. And I think that is the message in general. For the young generation that is basically present here at the Youth Summit, I think this generation in many ways is more resilient than they think, because COVID hit this generation in a way that nobody expected at the time. And that basically had a huge impact in the lives of a lot of people, young people as well, people that were trying to study, people that were trying to play, people that were trying to go to festivals, or all the things that people like to do or have to do. And that was seriously interrupted by, in this case, a pandemic. And that's part of my motto, which is expect the unexpected. And so this discussion on war was for many, and maybe for still too many, a discussion that is sort of a faraway thing. It is something that will not happen to us because we live in Sweden, far away from all the troubles in the world, but also in the Netherlands or other parts of the alliance. And there is parts in the alliance that is closer to Russia, or as we just heard, if you live in Ukraine, then you know what war is. It's not a crisis, it's a war. And so therefore, people have to understand that it's not a faraway thing. War is back in Europe. That's why I try to explain that we have to become more resilient as a society, not only the military, because as a society we play a role in being ready. And the readier we are, as they say, you know, if you want peace, prepare for war. And therefore, the things I said, I basically have said for 1.5 years already. But in a way, it was, emphasized by a number of things that were said by President Macron, who talked about war economy. It was the German minister who talked about the kriegstüchtig, and it was the Swedish chief of defense who said we have to be ready for war. And so suddenly there was a critical mass, and therefore it went viral. But in many ways, I said what I said for the last 1.5 years. But I honestly think that we all play a role. And the young lady from Ukraine that I just heard gave some great examples if it comes to how we make sure that there is a service after service for the Ukrainian wounded soldiers that now help to build drones and therefore have a new purpose again. It is about making sure that our society understands, as I see in Sweden or in the Scandinavian navies more than in many other navies, is that when I talked about simple things like have water in-house for 36 hours, have batteries for your radio and for your flashlight, is not a new thing in the Scandinavian nations, because there could be a power outage. And it's not only about war, it's also about a natural disaster, or there's a power outage. And we now live almost in a society where we do not accept any failures, where we do not accept any risk. And things can go wrong. It's not something new per se, but we have lived in a sort of perfect society for so long that we hardly accept that there is a disturbance. And so there's a lot of things that people can do. Last week I was in London for a CEO conference, and they asked me for examples. And it was interesting because just before me, the CEO of IKEA had spoken. And he said, when the war started, we found out that we were confronted with the fact that 25% of the wood that we use in IKEA came from Russia. And therefore, basically, overnight, we had to change that because we didn't want to buy our wood in Russia anymore. And that is the way industry has to prepare. It is about energy. It is about raw materials. It is about food. All these things can and have been and will be used as a weapon by Russia. We didn't have a contract with Gazprom for oil and gas. We had a contract with Putin. And when he decided to tell Gazprom to switch off the valve, they did. That was not in the contract. So we have to understand that all the things that we thought, if you have a business contract amongst nations, we will never have war again. It's not true. And we see the same with China, where there's a lot of dependencies on China with regard to the raw materials for medicine, 75% in the hands of China, 95% of the raw materials for renewable energy is in the hands of China. So we all have to understand that this will have an impact in our future. And as your future is probably longer than my future, you will have to deal with this for longer. And therefore, we have to, if you sort of think about these things, dare to think about these things, that is part of resilience as well. If you dare to think the unthinkable, then there's less surprises when it happens. And I think that is, you went through the pandemic already, so in a way you are more resilient than you think. But there is many things that we can do, where we can help our society to become stronger.
Thank you very much, Admiral. I think we have a lot to learn from our friends in Ukraine, and I have to say from what I've heard also from our friends in Sweden of doing so much to raising awareness of such a complex challenge. I'd like to move to deterrence and defense because we have short time. We are approaching the NATO summit in Washington, and I believe we should do a early review. The summit in Lithuania was an historical summit. There were so many important agreements that the allies agreed upon, increasing defense spending, ramping up the production. We will come back later on the ramping up the production of military capabilities, but I'd like to ask your opinion on, have you seen positive progression in this past almost 12 months? And what are possible speed bumps that are actually hindering the process?
There's two things basically happening at the same time. So after Vilnius, we are now looking at how can we make sure that all the decisions that the leaders took in Vilnius are going to happen, that we make sure that these plans are executable, that we get more military men and women, that they have a higher readiness, that we buy more capabilities that we need to be readier, that we're going to do more exercises against those new plans, that we make sure that changes in command and control are there. So there's a lot of things to do to make sure that it will work as we planned, as we have planned. And that means a lot of investments, it means a lot of recruitment, it means retaining people, it means maybe thinking about conscription or reservists or mobilization. So there's a lot of things that is beyond the influence of the Ministry of Defense. It's a wider political discussion on what it means for a nation to be readier for deterring and defending against the two threats that we're facing, which is Russia and the terrorist groups. So that's where societal resilience comes into play and where we have to do a lot of work. It's about military mobility to make sure that the things that come from the US and Canada enter in a harbor and then that we're able to transport them over roads and over through air, and that there's less restrictions when we try to cross a border, and all these things we talk about for 7, 8, 9 years now in EU and NATO. There's a lot of talk, but there's not enough walk because there's still a lot of restrictions. So all these things is beyond the military, is beyond the Ministry of Defense. And I think slowly, in my eyes sometimes too slowly, there is the realization that we need to do this together, and not that you only look at the Minister of Defense and the Chief of Defense and then say, why is it not happening? Because it's beyond their reach, beyond their power. So I think slowly that is a realization is growing, but it's also about the defense capacity, as you said, and we're going to talk later about that. But all these things have an impact on what we need to achieve. So that's one. On the other side, there is the support for Ukraine that needs to continue. And to tell, I see you there with the Ukrainian lady. I said it in Ukraine when I visited there in March in Kiev, and I said it. I will say it now again. The yellow and the blue flag that Sweden has, of course, now in front of the NATO headquarters will not be the only blue and yellow flag in front of the NATO headquarters. And the support for Ukraine is essential because they don't lack courage, they lack ammunition and weapons. And they won't be, they cannot fire promises at the Russians. So all the nations that promise things have to deliver on air defense, on artillery, grenades, and all the things that Ukraine need. It is in our own interest. Ukraine is in many ways defending not only themselves, but our freedom as well. And therefore we need to continue to support them. Slowly there is now an uptick in the help again, the 60 billion package from the US. There's more promises from the UK, from the Netherlands, from other nations. So that's good. And I think, but in the end, for them, the only thing that counts is if you're in the trenches and if you are at your artillery gun, that you look next to you and that there is a pile of artillery grenades. Not a pile of promises. You need grenades. And for them, that is what they need now. That is what I will tell the Chiefs of Defense on Thursday when I meet with them in Brussels. And therefore, that is going on at the same time. Now, to do these things at the same time requires our industry to ramp up in a way that they're unable to do. And the reason for that is because the last 30 years, we have an economy that is based on just in time, just enough. And it means that if you order your car today, they will produce it after you ordered it. And it's great because they can plan everything that all the orders of the customers, they can plan that against the capacity that they have. So you will use your capacity to the max. That is what they do. And you will not have stocks because stocks are stupid, because it's dead money. And we know from the pandemic and from a war that in the health industry and in the armed forces, it's not enough. just in time, just enough. It's too late and it's too little. So you need to be able to handle peak demand signals, and that is not possible at the moment. And so that's one of the things we have to work hard on as well. So the fact that it is happening parallel, making ourselves stronger and making sure that Ukraine is able to win this war. And it's not too late. There was a delay in all these deliveries, and it's very difficult at the front in Ukraine, but it's not too late. People have to realize that. When General Zaluzhny visited the NATO headquarters in January 2022, that was just before the war began, he told the chiefs of defense, the people in Ukraine, especially the young generation, will not accept Russian rule in Ukraine. And they have shown that. They have shown that through a remarkable courage and perseverance. And therefore, I'm sure if we help them, they will be able not only to stay in the fight, but to win. And they have done remarkable things. I mean, they have regained 50% of what the Russians took initially. They have, without a navy, pushed the Russian navy back to the other side of the Crimea. And as a result, they now have a grain corridor that is from Odessa past Romania, Bulgaria, Turkey into the Straits, without a deal with Russia. They are targeting Russian logistic targets deep into Russia. There's 350,000 dead Russians and wounded Russians. So it's not going well with Russia at all. None of the Russian strategic objectives have been met, have been achieved. And we are now in day, 806 or 7 or 9 in this war. And so it's a remarkable achievement by the Ukrainian people. And it's not only the soldiers, it's the people. As she rightly said, this is a whole of society event, and war is. And I think we have to relearn that as well.
I have 2 follow-up questions, because I would like to touch upon Ukraine for sure, but also about the European Union that you mentioned when it comes to bolstering the industrial capacity of our continent. We've seen an inverse tendency lately. We've seen the European institution claiming defense as a strategic objective finally. We've seen several initiatives flourishing, and we've seen, like, for instance, the initiative to provide ammunition to Ukraine, or we've seen the attempt to identify an adequate strategy to bolster our production capacity. But as Mr. Borrell once said, I think it was 2023, a stronger European Union is a stronger NATO. And I'm not sure you necessarily agree with this statement, but we know for sure that a stronger European Union cannot exist without a strong cooperation and coordination with NATO. So if we see this relation and we see the possibility of having mutual advantages, how can we better synchronize and complement these efforts, and in order to increase the production and guarantee the security of demand that right now European companies, but defense companies in general, really need?
Yeah. I think the months after the start of the war, and that's the full-fledged war in Ukraine, because the war started 10 years ago in 2014, that period when the EU did what they are strong at, and NATO did what it's strong at, then the synergetic effect of those 2 organizations were remarkable. And I think it surprised us, but it also surprised the Russians, and it surprised the Chinese. So I think that is a moment where we stop talking about strategic autonomy and things that are sort of about a competition between NATO and EU. Because strategic autonomy sort of gives the impression that Europe can do without the US, and I don't believe that. The US needs Europe because we're the biggest trade partner of the US, and Europe needs the US. There's 100,000 American soldiers in Europe at the moment. If you combine the armies of the larger nations in Europe, you hardly get there. So we have to understand we need the US. And I don't know whether there will be a question about President Trump to be or not to be. I'm not that worried. And I think the US as a country has a great interest in NATO, in Europe, but we need to make sure that the nations invest enough in their own armed forces. That is the biggest point of critique. And so, to the industry. I think Europe has a great role to play when it comes to the defense industry, because it's not the core business of NATO to organize the industry. I'm talking more and more about industry because I think it's necessary. And the fact that I do means that it's not enough what is happening. Otherwise, I would have stopped talking about it. But the one problem that I still see is that there is still this, how do you say, dual tracks almost. Like, if it is our intention to help Ukraine, which I think is the intention of the 1 million grenades, then I think it shouldn't matter where the grenades come from. They don't necessarily have to come from Europe, because Ukraine needs grenades now. They don't need necessarily European grenades. They need grenades. Whether they come from South Korea or from South Africa or from Brazil, they don't care. As long as they fit into the guns, that is important. But but it's still then in this 1 million grenade project, there is still this discussion that it has to be a European company that has to produce it. And I understand that if you want to invest in European defense industry, that you expect European nations to buy there. So I'm not against that idea, but let's make that a longer term project. And then the immediate urgent problem is Ukraine, and then fix that with whatever means and with whatever producers. But they have been mixed. And that is something that I find difficult to understand, because it's not helping Ukraine as it should, not with the speed as they need it. So that is the sort of competition that is unfortunately still there. So yeah, I think they play an essential role. And I think we should focus first and foremost on making sure Ukraine wins this war, and then at the same time or parallel strengthen the European industry. Thank
you. You already mentioned it again, the issue of the challenge of providing military equipment to Ukraine. That has been one of the most discussed topics since the beginning of the war. And in this delicate phase of the war, it is even more. You also mentioned the aid that was approved by the United States, 60 billion euros. I want to ask you, because this is often a factor overlooked, and I think you're the perfect person to explain this to all of us, the issue of interoperability. Ukraine gets equipment from various countries, and different specific equipments have different features, require different trainings, and sometimes also specific maintenance, spare parts, and all other factors part of the logistic tail. Now my question is, I know NATO has been working closely with Ukraine, training them to use different type of equipment. But when we have to maximize the time and increase operational efficiency, how can we achieve more interoperability on the battlefield?
Again, these are parallel things, because, we have exported fragmentation. In Europe, we produce about 172 different weapon systems. And multiple fighter aircraft, multiple tanks, multiple frigates, multiple submarines, multiple tanks. So in the US, it's 35 different weapon systems. So we are building, with a much lower budget than the US, we build much more different weapon systems. And that means lower production numbers, which makes it in itself, of course, more expensive. And we have exported that, basically, not exported truly, but given away a lot of these weapon systems. And so we have exported fragmentation and into the Ukrainian armed forces, which of course is a nightmare. If you are now in the logistics department of the Ukrainian Air Force, it's unbelievable what they have to, how they have to make sure that all these different weapon systems have ammunition, have maintenance, all the different spare parts, all the different experience and expertise to make sure that it works. So it's an amazing achievement, and they do it. And of course, they would prefer to make it much easier. But but for now, having the weapon systems is more important than having more interoperability. But the day after the war, they have to decide which weapon systems we're going to keep and which weapon systems we're doing away with, because this is a nightmare. It's expensive, and it's too cumbersome and all these things. So for now, they deal with it, because having the weapon systems, even if it's too many different sorts, is better than to have no weapon system. So that is the practical problem. How come we build still so many different weapon systems? Because there is still too much national interest involved. Because if you talk to politicians in European nations, they say, yeah, it's very important that we make sure that there's interoperability and even interchangeability. They have now learned a new word, which actually means that you can, if you have a grenade, 155 millimeter grenade. The non-experts in the room probably said, well, if you have a grenade, then it fits into a 155 millimeter gun. But that's not true, because the manufacturers have made sure that the grenade that they make only fits in their gun, either by software or by a hardware thingy that makes and it doesn't fit in another gun. So if you are in Ukraine, you get a box of grenades. You have to look, does it fit or you have to make sure that it goes to the gun where these grenades fit in. And there are 16 different types of 155 millimeter grenades in NATO. 16 different types. And we have agreed since 1968 that we will standardize this. And the last update is from, I think, 2012. And in that document, it says that, and 14 nations in a footnote say in that document that they have the right to deviate from the standards. That's interesting, isn't it? So we all are in favor of something that is not too difficult to understand, interoperability. But when it comes to, shall we make this and turn this into practice, then national industry policies, national industry interests prevail, unfortunately. Now, in a time when there was a low production and low series, I sort of understand, because it's like your printer. The printers are not too expensive nowadays. It's the ink where they earn the money with. And it's the same with artillery grenades and guns. So therefore, I understand if you have low series and low numbers, but now there is big numbers. So if we use the STANAGs, the standardization agreements, and we're going to build the same, then actually you can make sure we can go to joint procurement, buy things together, then you have larger orders, and then the industry has the long-term demand signals they are asking for. And then hopefully this increase in the defense production will happen faster, because private investors are willing to invest in the defense industry. So I think it is extremely important. But again, there's a lot of talk, but there should be more walk.
Thank you. Before I go to my last question, I would like to remind the audience in the room and online that we will open the floor for Q&As shortly. I want to ask you, my last question would be about Sweden. Sweden is the latest country who joined the alliance, and
Terrible.
It's latest. And their military power is undeniable. And I want you to, maybe if you could tell us more at what are the upgrades that the alliance felt after a country like Sweden joined the alliance?
I would say relief. That is what we all felt. We felt finally. Those are the two words I would say. But and extremely happy. So I think Finland and Sweden are a great add-on to the alliance, because Of course, we have much more to defend. It's a lot of territory to look after together, but they bring very, very capable armed forces and a very resilient societies where with great industrial capacity. So the alliance as a whole has become stronger with the accession of Finland and Sweden. The funny thing is that Russia always talks about NATO as being a huge threat to them. If that was really true, they would have responded completely differently to the accession of first Finland and now Sweden a year later. Why am I saying that? The Russians didn't move one soldier away from Ukraine to the Finnish border. So if NATO really was a threat to them, they would have responded differently, because then they had to defend a 1,350-kilometer border with Finland. And they didn't, because they know we are a defensive alliance and we're not attacking them. So this is all for internal consumption that Putin is saying that. But it is great to have those two nations. Finland has a great history of collective defense. For 80 years, they had to do that on their own, and they took it very seriously. I think Sweden went through the same decisions as many other European nations in terms of the peace dividend and a lot of disinvestment. But Sweden has picked up with great speed and vigor. So I think in many ways we are all thrilled and happy to see Sweden and Finland as a member. Militarily, they were cooperating with us for a long, long time. They were in Afghanistan for 20 years with us, so they know, as no other nations, how to operate with NATO, and therefore it was a very smooth transition from being neutral or independent to become a member. And the funny thing is, I visited Finland and Sweden with the North Atlantic Council in, I think, November 2021. And I made a joke at the time to both the chiefs of defense. And I said, so when are you becoming a member? And they looked at me almost shocked and they said, never. Never. It will never happen. Okay. And 4 months later, they applied. And the reason for that is that they saw and understood that the rules-based international order we all defend is necessary to be neutral. Because if you are neutral, you need the rules-based international order. Because actually what you need is that another nation recognizes you as a neutral nation, which is partly arranged in this rules-based international order, and they need to respect the fact that you are neutral. And when Finland and Sweden saw that a sovereign state with internationally recognized borders was attacked by Russia, and therefore they violated the rules-based international order, they knew that to count on this was basically non-existent anymore. So there you are.
All right. We have around 10 minutes left. I see a couple of hands already. Can we get a mic here on the first row to this lady with the white jacket? Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Mariam. I am from Youth Atlantic Treaty Association International and Germany. So my question is, we as NATO help Ukraine a lot. But you mentioned this today, and we heard also from Mr. Stoltenberg that there is more needed. So I would ask, what concrete steps we have to do that our support is enough today, not in 6 months or 1 year, but today?
Yeah,
thank you.
That's a very good question, and I think that is part of the discussion that the defense ministers had with Mr. Stoltenberg and President Zelensky a couple of weeks ago in a virtual meeting, and it means digging deeper into first our stocks. Now, how deep the nations dig is for every nation to decide, because every nation is not only having an obligation towards NATO, but you have an obligation to yourself first. Because Article 5, everybody knows an attack on one is an attack on all, but Article 3 is for a reason before Article 5. And Article 3 says every nation has to be able to defend itself. That has been neglected for a very, very long time by many, many nations. But it means that, so in order to live up to that promise, basically to your own population, that's one of the first priorities of a government, to make sure they protect their own people. So if you give away ammunition to Ukraine, you take a risk, because if you are attacked and you don't have ammunition, how do you fight the enemy then? What the Secretary General has said, and what I say regularly, is as Ukraine is fighting our enemy, Russia, as long as they fight them, they cannot, or the chance that they attack us as well is much, much lower. I'm not saying it's impossible, but much, much lower. And at least with conventional warfare, I mean, hybrid warfare is something we see more and more popping up, but in terms of conventional weapons. So first is digging deeper in what we have. Second, many nations with the growing budgets have ordered ammunition and new capabilities 3, 4, 5 years ago, before the war. Some of that stuff is coming in to the nations. It's being delivered by the industry. So the nations have to decide for themselves, am I going to give that immediately away to Ukraine or not? And again, I'm not judging anyone on their decision, because it is not mine, it is theirs, because I don't have the responsibility to protect Sweden. I mean, Sweden has the responsibility to protect Sweden, and together, of course, we will also protect Sweden as NATO. But therefore, it's a sovereign decision by the nations. But that is one of the things they need to do, and so that is one. The second thing is to keep the maximum pressure on the growth of the production in the defense industry, and some of the things you can do it fairly quickly by, for example, working more hours with more shifts in a factory. But I hope by now that the factories that we have are doing that to the max, and if they then need to increase production, it probably requires building an extra factory or things like that. And we see that. We see there is groundbreaking work of a new factory in Germany for artillery grenades and for Patriots, but it will take at least a year, if not 1.5 years, before something comes from the belt in those factories. So it's a combination of things, and maybe, you know, look around the world and literally buy everything you can to give it to Ukraine then.
Okay, I would like the girl with the white shirt. Yes.
Thank you very much. I'm Anna Nalivaik, and I work for a think tank in Brussels called the Martin Center. My question to you, Admiral, is about sort of the state of Russia's war economy, how long it can sustain the war, because we have seen Putin has been sworn again president, and he has made some changes at the top right now. Russia has a new defense minister, and he has transitioned to a war economy partially. It's not a full transition yet. And it appears that even with the 14 round of sanctions that we have imposed by the EU, Russia is capable to keep producing military equipment, also with the help of China, North Korea, and Iran. So the analysis around it is somehow different. Some say that Russia is now at maximum capacity, cannot sustain that any longer, but some say that it's just the beginning, also considering the amount of men that Russia has and can send to the front. So what is your assessment of sort of this transition of to a war economy of Russia, and for how long can it sustain the war? Where do we stand now? Thank you.
These are questions that will never have an easy answer, because there are so many aspects that will basically define the outcome. One is how much money can Russia generate, for example, with oil and gas. Now, if they basically give away oil and gas in return for goods that go into weaponry, goods from China, for example, so they give away oil and gas to China, they get microchips and steel and things like that to build weapon systems and ammunition, then there's no added value to the economy. And then basically that is a problem in the longer term for Russia. That's the disadvantage of turning an economy into a war economy, because you basically only support the war effort, which is important if you talk about winning or losing. And the fact that they are doing that means that they are very, very serious about this. Don't underestimate the decision in Russia about this. They mean they want to win this war. And that's why we cannot allow them to win this war. Because if they win this war, this is not the end of the problems. It's the beginning of much more problems, not only with Russia, but also with autocracies somewhere else in the world. That might is right. So that is one. How can they still generate adding value to their economy? If that's not the case, in the longer run, they have a problem. We know that the special fund they had, there was a lot of money in it, and people say somewhere end of 2024, early 2025, it's empty, and therefore that money will be used because it has the priority. It has the absolute priority. But in many ways, there's no success in Russia. So there is not a long-term sustainable solution for him. I don't believe that. So therefore, and pessimists don't win wars, so therefore we have to be optimistic about this. We have to believe in we are more than half of the world's economy. If we say we cannot do this, who are we? Of course we can do this. Of course we can increase our defense production. Of course we can help Ukraine until it's over. We are able to do this. But we have to focus on this as well. And you slowly see some political leaders like Sunak in the UK, Macron in France, who are saying we need to put more focus on this effort to increase the defense production. But in our part of the world, it's not an order from the government. It is convincing financial institutions. It is making sure that people do things on their, based on their free will. But it needs a lot of convincing. And the financial institutions talk about, it's against the European sustainability goals, or it's not ethical to invest in the defense industry. I find it mind-boggling, but that's still the case in a number of situations. And serious financial institutions like pension funds that still say that, and say climate change and biodiversity is the two most important things that is happening now for our children. Well, wake up. The insecurity and the problems with our stability in terms of security is a serious problem for the new generation as well. And therefore, it takes a long time to convince people. That's sometimes the disadvantage of a democracy. But I believe once we are there, we probably have a better track record than somewhere else to make it work. I mean, COVID, we solved the vaccine problem with money. Basically, the ministers of finance put money on the table and said, make the vaccine now, not tomorrow, now. We can do that with the defense industry as well. But it's still not that urgent.
We have a lot of questions. I see also a lot of questions online, but unfortunately our time is up. So I would like to thank the Admiral Bauer for being with us. Maybe we can thank him with a round of applause. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And good luck.
Thank you, Admiral, for your insights regarding the defense industry and material acquisition, and also your statement regarding Ukraine and how we'll continue to support them for them to win the war. But now it is time for us to take a lunch break. So a couple of housekeeping items for each and every one of you. Lunch will be served here at Epicenter, up at the terrace. You will see the exit just right here. My colleagues will help and direct you in the right direction. And for those of you that's watching online, we encourage you to check out the networking and chat functions in the app. And when we get back, we will also initiate a poll quite, as soon as we get back. So have your phones and devices ready for when we are back here. So please make sure that you're back at your seats at 1:30 p.m. After the break, we will talk about new technologies, security, and challenges. So have a great lunch and see you soon.